Has your instrument had a hard year? Is your instrument not sounding like it should? Maybe it's time for a service. When you book your service now, you will also get a free dust ball. This is a limited offer and is only available while stocks last. Hi everybody! Today I'm going to talk a little bit about instrument care. Now, I've done a video a little while ago on how to look after your instrument every day, but often when people buy instruments they ask, so what do I need to do? Do I take the instrument in for a service? And this is what I recommend. I recommend that you get your instrument checked professionally at least once a year. And that's because there's wear and tear. There's going to be different levels of checking depending on the levels of instruments that you have. So if you have a beginner instrument, you know, like between $500 and about $2,000, then you might need to have a bit less work done. And if you've got a nicer instrument, especially an antique instrument that might have a better quality varnish, or if you buy a newly made instrument by a master maker, these instruments need to be taken care of well. And I meet so many professionals who just don't actually take the time to look after their instruments. A lot of hobbyists actually look after their instruments much better than some professionals do. But that's not everyone, you know. There's a lot of professionals that really look after their instruments beautifully. A few years ago I saw the was it 12 cellos or the cellos of the Berlin Philharmonic in Brisbane, and I was just so impressed at the state of each of the instruments. You know, they were all sitting there. Each instrument was beautifully polished. You could see it was really well looked after. And that's the kind of thing, I mean, firstly, it feels better to have a well looked after instrument, but it also, the instrument's going to work better. And then if you've got an antique instrument, you really need to take care of it, because you're kind of the custodian of this instrument. You know, it'll be passed on further down the line. And but even with a new instrument, you're a custodian. And how nice would it be to actually pass an instrument down the line that's been really well looked after? So when an instrument comes to me for a service, these are some of the things I check, and these are some of the things that need to be done. So the first thing I check is I make sure that the whole body is okay, that over the year that no cracks or bad bumps have developed on the instrument. This is quite a new instrument. This is my beautiful Ziado violin. So it's not going to have a lot of problems. It does have bumps and scratches, but it's actually because the instrument's been antique to basically made to look older. So the first thing I check is I check the whole body, and I do that by tapping gently around the entire instrument. And you'll hear a different sound. There'll be a slightly buzzy sound if there's an open spot. And let me demonstrate. This is an old instrument I have hanging around. So this is what it sounds like if the instrument, you know, if there's not an open spot. And this is probably quite an extreme example. So this means that some of the joints need gluing. And that's not a bad thing, because if the joints are slightly loose, instruments are made from timber. So the timber contracts when it's dry and it expands when it's humid. And so if the instrument contracts a lot, but the sides are really, really firmly glued, it could actually happen that the instrument will develop a crack. So it's not a bad thing to have the plates slightly loose and coming apart. And the repair, like to just glue the joints, is way cheaper than it is to have a proper crack repair. If you need a crack repair, the whole plate needs to be taken off the instrument. So once I've done that and checked over the instrument and made sure it's okay, the next thing I do is I actually check the varnish. So I check firstly the hand patch here, and on some instruments the hand patch gets really worn. This one here is a good example. I'm just soaking something up here, so there's a strange piece of paper, but you can see that the varnish has actually worn off from the hands of the player. It's really important that the varnish gets replaced as quickly as possible, because perspiration or sweat, firstly it's sour, like it has acid, and it has oil. If the oil soaks into the timber, it means that these patches will become trouble areas forever, because when oily timbers don't glue. And so when there's oil soaked into these patches, it basically means you can glue the instrument, but it will probably come undone you know, within half a year or something like that, and that's really frustrating. And to repair that, like to get oil out, you literally have to remove the timber, and that's a huge repair. So I check over the varnish of the instrument, and in the service I will put varnish on all the bumps and scratches, and I'll polish the whole instrument. So I'll varnish any of the worn areas. I will clean the whole instrument, like so there'll be rosin buildup on the top plate, the fingerboard and bridges. So I'll clean the whole instrument and polish the whole instrument. The next thing that I need to do in a service, I check the fingerboard. And some players won't wear the fingerboard much, but other players will literally wear some grooves into the fingerboard where the strings are, and they will also wear grooves the other way into the fingerboard where they put the fingers down. And having grooves in the fingerboard, it basically makes the fingerboard wavy, and when you then play a string, it makes the sound slightly fuzzy. So it takes away from the clarity of the sound. So an unplaned fingerboard with grooves in it will take away from the clarity of the sound of your instrument. So the next thing I will do, I will also check the bridge, make sure it's straight. I'll also check the fingerboard action. I'll show you with a ruler. So if you extend the fingerboard forward with a ruler, and then measure the height here, it should be around 27 millimeters for the violin. It's different for the violoncello, and that gives you a certain bridge height. And if the bridge has the right height, the right amount of pressure comes down onto the top plate, and when the right amount of pressure comes onto the top plate, you're going to get a good sound. Okay, on thinner top plates you might want a little bit less pressure, but on a standard top plate you want the right kind of pressure. So I actually check the neck height, and what happens with instruments that every 30 years or so the fingerboard height just very slowly drops down and eventually is just too low, and to adjust we'll have to lower the bridge. But after a time, the bridge will just be too low to make a nice sound on the instrument. And that's the point I'll take the whole neck out and reset it, so it gets refitted at a slightly steeper angle. And that's called resetting the neck. And that's something that has to be done on instruments, usually every 30 years. But in a really humid climate like Queensland, it could happen every 15 years or even less. It always depends on the shape of the top plate and those kinds of things. So this is one of the things I'll check in the service as well, how that's going. Now, if the fingerboards come down just very slightly, say half a millimeter, what will have happened is that the bridge obviously stays the same height. So if the fingerboard comes down slightly, suddenly the strings here at the fingerboard, so the string action will be too high. So I'll need to lower the bridge very slightly to adjust for that. So that could be one of the things that I do in the service as well. Then obviously I'll check the quality of the strings. That's really important. I make sure that the strings are actually in a good condition. If they're not, well, I'll replace the strings. And then one of the last things I do, obviously I'll check the fine tuner, make sure that's fine. I'll check the whole instrument to make sure there's no buzzers. And then at the end, I'll check that the sound post is in the correct place. And at the end of the service, I'll make some really fine adjustments to basically make the sound absolutely perfect on that instrument. So I always check the peg and make sure that they work well. That's really important because when you're tuning, you don't want to actually give yourself RSI while while you're trying to tune an instrument because it's too hard or if the strings are slipping. So I make sure that the pegs fit 100% and that they work really well. So after a service, it's literally like having your car serviced. The instrument usually works so much better. It looks beautiful. So, you know, having a nice shiny looking instrument, you know, makes you want to play more. But in the end, when your instrument comes back, it ends up sounding so much better and working so much better. And it looks so much better. It ends up being a lot more fun to play. I recommend that if people have auditions or concerts, to get the instrument serviced about 2 or 3 weeks beforehand to make sure that the instrument is in its best condition. For me, if there's nothing really bad wrong and someone's booked the instrument in well in advance, I can usually do it over 2 days, which means, you know, a player can practice one morning, drop the instrument to me and pick it up the following afternoon. So, you know, there won't be that much practice missed. I know what it's like to prepare for auditions, so that can always be quite challenging. Anyway, so the main thing is no matter what kind of instrument you have, it needs to be checked over. A lot of the tips I gave today are tips for higher level instruments, you know, instruments, well, definitely not beginner instruments. But even beginner instruments need to be checked over. There are probably, you know, the service won't be anywhere near as costly as a good quality instrument, but it's so much nicer to have your instrument working well and sounding good. Yeah, so look after your instrument and remember, you know, play the music you love and love the music you play. Like, really enjoy what you play, because when you put that joy into your music, it really shows, especially to an audience. Anyway, if you like my videos, you know, subscribe to my channel and actually click the little bell. That way you find out every time I post a new video. Also, if you like this video, click the like button and talk to you next time. See ya!